Hello and welcome to our Firestorm May 2017 Crisis Coach webinar. Today we're going to be talking about natural disasters in your organization, planning for preparedness. My name is Karen Masullo, and we're going to be joined by a couple of other people, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. I'd like you to feel free to connect with us and engage through our Twitter account at Firestorm Soul, or on Facebook at Firestorm Solutions. That would be the same for LinkedIn. Just Google us. You'll find us. And you can visit us at our website at firestorm.com. There's a hashtag for this session if you'd like to engage during the session or afterward. I'll look for the hashtag Crisis Coach, and we'll be able to respond to any questions or input or comments that you have. You can also use the dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen if you're watching this live, and that is the GoToWebinar little toolbar, and there is a chat function in there. You can ask a question, you can make a comment, and if we are not able to get to those in this session, and we're timed pretty tight on this, we will follow up afterward and be more than happy to assist you in anything that you're curious about. So thanks so much. If you're watching this on the web on our YouTube channel at youtube.com Continuity Experts, again, you can use webinars at firestorm.com to communicate with us. As you know, Firestorm transforms crisis into value. We are the nation's crisis coach, and we have expertise in crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We are your crisis coach. Now, this presentation is not going to be complete without any accompanying oral or comments and discussion, and any of the work product provided by Firestorm should be read in conjunction and guidance given by national, regional, and local authorities, as well, and most importantly, as your company's personal counsel. Moreover, the information given and comments made in this webinar should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. I'd like to thank all of you for joining today, those that are members of the RenWeb family. RenWeb is, as you know, a powerful integrated solution that connects administrative functions, your classroom, and your home together, powerful notification system so that we can help keep parents, the community, our children, our staff, our employees informed and safe. So we appreciate this series being underwritten by our partners at RenWeb, and we've enjoyed working with RenWeb schools and those that are potential for a very long time. So we look forward to more and great content in the future. I would like to say that today we're going to have, in just a few moments, some information from Jim Satterfield, the CEO of Firestorm. When I was putting this session together, I was thinking about all of the fantastic counsel that Jim has given to me as a crisis manager when I have experienced significant life-changing events as an employee of Firestorm, both personally and both in natural disaster and weather related. And I know one time many years ago, not many years ago, but about 5, 6 years ago, I was talking to Jim, and I said, you know, you're really an expert at this. You should start a business telling people how to manage their crises. Now, he'd already done that, and we have been around since 2005, but there's no person I'd rather have at my side when I needed help with critical decisions than Jim Satterfield. So Jim is also a co-founder of the firm, and along with Susie Laughlin and Harry Rulin, we have been serving both business organizations, nonprofits, and schools for since 2005. Now, last month when we started our session, we talked about what keeps you up at night, and we were very specific about the types of interactions that may occur and what kinds of communications. We got pretty specific on those. So now we're going to step back and we're going to look at a broad event that could happen to us in the nature of a natural disaster or a significant disaster event. And those types of events as we reviewed last month, include the potential for a loss of life, not necessarily because of something that happened on our property, but because it could be an illness, it could be the loss of life in your community, a child for no other reason other than they were ill and it didn't happen on your property or at your school, but it's still a significant event. An injury on your property, a major supplier interruption of some type. Last month we talked about with the happenstance if there was a food recall of a specific type of product that you use heavily and managing that kind of a crisis. Certainly an epidemic or pandemic, and when we see natural disasters, we see an increase in communicable illness and other illnesses that can significantly affect the operation of your schools. Certainly a loss of a major income source if you are funded in a specific way through a specific different types of grants or other funds, and suddenly because of a natural disaster those are not available or possibly redirected somewhere else, or there is a need for those to be redirected. There is a public brand damage event. Jim's going to talk about that here in just a moment on this next slide we're going to look at. We know we're all very concerned with hacking, leaks, and data breaches right now. There's a variety of ways that you can hack and disrupt society. We're going to look at one of those examples coming up. A failure of senior leadership to lead. Now, if you get an opportunity on our website, right on the front page, there are 3 columns of information. We have news, we have resources, and then we have papers and thought leadership and downloads. And the most recent one is a conversation between 2 crisis leaders. And it is an interview of Jim Satterfield with Bruce Blythe. And though the conversation between Bruce and Jim is fantastic, they are 2 of the best crisis leaders in their field. And if you want to learn a little bit about leadership, listening to them speak about it is tremendous. So if you get a chance, please download that paper today. We're all concerned about terrorism and terrorist activities, and last, natural disaster. So let's look at the impact of natural disasters. 1 in 4, based on a survey we did of about 900, and I think it was 950 folks that have participated in our webinars, said that natural disaster was something that certainly was a primary concern. Only cyber attacks was higher than that. And if you look to the right, we can take that little pie piece from loss of life, and let's go ahead and combine that with a natural disaster or devastation, because certainly during a natural disaster, there can be a significant loss of life. And we have sadly seen that all too often. But then I'd also like you to look at the purple pie piece, and if you can say that 3 times fast, let me know. I'll give you an award. But the purple pie piece is a significant reputation event. And significant reputation protection during a natural disaster go hand in hand to the point of value of your organization. It's important that we remember that resiliency and preparedness are brand attributes. Jim, do you have a moment that you can talk to us a little bit about your point of view on that?
Well, first of all, I really like the triple Ps with the purple piece that you were listening to, but it was exciting to hear that alliteration coming together. If you look at those areas, the natural disasters, the loss of life, and significant reputation, that's almost half of where the concern level comes in. If I were to say United Airlines right now, most everybody on the call would be thinking about the doctor being drugged off the plane. It started to shape what our image is and what our feelings are about them. Similarly, if you have this kind of an event in your school, if there's this area, then this will start to define what your school is about, and that will overpower everything else because there's an expectation that you're going to keep the students safe during the day. That care becomes an important element associated with it. And Karen's bringing up some other thoughts as you see someone being carried out in a stretcher, and I think you're going to ask an important question. What's the important question, Karen?
Well, if you take a moment to think about your organization and natural disasters that are specific to your regional or local area, ask a more important question, which is, could you handle it? Could you handle something that happened like this to your school or your organization tomorrow or today? When natural disaster strikes, something that is critically important is that you have a well-designed and executed plan. It's going to help you in a crisis because it will differentiate yourself from your competitor organizations. And it helps meet and exceed the expectations of your stakeholders. If I'm a parent looking for the best education for my child, and you know your school provides the best education, but I know that another school has performed very well in a flood or a tornado situation or an earthquake, and yours not as much, I may lead toward the side of the school that seems to have a better preparedness and resiliency profile. The picture you're looking at is from Joplin, and this was about 3 weeks after the tornado devastated that community. This is during the cleanup. It took a long time before they were able to even start the cleanup because of how significant the damage was. And when I first started with Firestorm, I had asked Jim Satterfield, who is our biggest competitor in the market? And Jim said, that's easy, denial. And that made a profound impact on me. And then he said, what I did in order to craft how we can combat when we're in a disaster is I created a methodology. And so Jim created the Predict.Plan.Perform methodology. Jim, do you want to talk about why you created that and what that means?
Well, as we think about those things, in a crisis or a disaster, everybody wants to immediately jump into perform, doing what they need to do and make sure those things happen. I think at this point, that has been shown to clearly be a mistake. You need to move back. As we think about the methodology of Predict, Plan, Perform, understanding first what the vulnerabilities and threats are, what are their impacts on our facilities, on our people, on our brand and reputation, those become the important elements, and so that we're ready to deal with those things if they're occurring. Plans to be able to address them directly, whether that's physical security or a continuity of operations or looking at behaviors of concern with workplace violence coming into the schools or cyber protection or communicable illness. The list goes on and on. So we have to have those plans. And then finally, under Perform, it's not just the crisis, it's before that. It's the training, it's the exercising, it's testing it. Therefore, we know what we need to do, when we need to do it, and how to do it. Crisis management and crisis communication just isn't something that you jump into off the top of your head. It's an opportunity for you to make sure that the right decision is made at the right time. We'll say this again toward the end, but it's the decisions that you make, it's the actions that you take, and it's the words that you say that will determine, is this event going to stabilize or is it going to escalate? Back to you, Karen.
Thank you, Jim. So we need to know that you've made a plan. And this image is, again, from Joplin. When that tornado came through, it left more than 4,000 children with nowhere to go to school. And this is a picture of one of the schools, the devastation that was experienced. And as Jim has said when he and I discussed this image, is that if you are a parent working anywhere in a local community, you would leave what you were doing immediately because family trumps work, and you would drive immediately to that location. And this is what those parents saw. Excuse me, I accidentally touched my screen. I have a touch screen, and it changed the slide. In that, there was a secondary crisis that occurred during the primary crisis where if I were to tell you that children drowned in this event, You'd say, well, wait a minute, this was a tornado. This was not a flooding event. Well, children evacuated into the lower levels of the school, and in one of those lower levels, a pipe burst when the tornado hit the facility, and the water poured into that basement area where they were sheltered, and sadly, there was a loss of life. So when you make your plan, we need to do something important. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment, but we really need to understand all hazards and threats. And I know we talk about this every time we have a webinar. It's because we really want to make sure you sit down and talk with your folks about have we really explored every aspect of what could happen. And not only that, do we know who our people are who are responding? Are we in the right spots? Do we have the right people in the right places? Because your readiness and your enterprise value go hand in hand. And if you'll look at the third bullet point here, I'm sorry I did it again. I touched my screen. This is a brand new computer, and I love it very much, and I forget it has a touch screen. Promoting and enforcing a culture of readiness will protect your organization's assets. Jim, do you have a comment you'd like to make in this specific point?
Well, I think when we talk about it, it's a culture, it's an environment, and our assets aren't just the building, it's the students, it's the teachers, it's who you are as an organization. If I ask everybody on the phone today to tell me the state flower where your school is located, you may or may not know. If I picked out a state you're not in, let's say Colorado, and ask you, tell me the state flower in Colorado, and you go, I don't know, but if I told you it was Columbine, that's the state flower of Colorado, you don't think about that, you think about the event. If you don't have this as part of your culture, designing your plan to cover the emergency, the incident management, the crisis management, the recovery associated with it, you'll be defined event. It will be what your school becomes known for, not all of the wonderful things that it represents and all of the values that it brings. Where you start here is you do a threat analysis, as Karen has up on the screen. And we think about what are the threats that could happen to us. And the term of art that's used here is all hazards. It's an all hazards approach. And we divide it between natural disasters, man-made, and look at those, categorizing the events and then saying, what is their impact on our facility, on our people, on our brand and reputation, on our finances? How quickly is the onset? What's the duration? What's the intensity of these events? And it allows us then to help rank those priorities. And then for each one, you need to stop and look at what are the triggers, what are the indicators that that's about to happen. That's the most important aspect, to be prepared to be able to take that action. And this picture that's up right now about Oklahoma and the tornadoes that came through previously, look at that blue line. Imagine that the Plaza Towers is your school, or the Briarwood Elementary is your school. Think about the impact associated with that. Then look up behind where it says the failure to train is one of the identified common failures, and I'll list those in a moment, but right behind it you'll see very closely that the Moore Medical Center is there. If that is taken out, then you don't have any place to get the children to that have been hurt or injured in this particular event. Also, when this comes down, parents know where their schools are for their children, and they're going to be trying to get there as quickly as they can. And that picture earlier, Karen, that you showed of the school in Joplin, imagine the impact that it had on those parents when they pulled up in front of the school and saw the destruction. It's overwhelming. The 5 common failures in every disaster and crisis are failure to control critical supply chains, not getting what you need when you need it. Second is failure to train employees for working at home. 70% of employees don't know what to do in a disaster or crisis. The third is failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. If you don't monitor for those, then you're going to be caught by surprise. Fourth is failure to test and update the plans. And then lastly is a failure to have a crisis communications plan. If you don't have those in place, they start to all work against you and are going to make the impacts so much greater. There's a magnifying event around these 5 common failures. Karen?
Thank you, Jim. The next thing you must do once you identify your common failures, you must train everyone on their role and what to do before a crisis occurs. If you've ever been in a crisis, and there are some of you who have experienced a crisis, you know that leadership, great leadership, leads. They lead because they're practiced, and they've trained. And the way a crisis unfolds may not be exactly as we trained for or as we documented, but it is the act of knowing I need to stop for a moment, figure out where my resources are in my next steps, and delegate to the people who I have trained with to do their associated tasks. There's rarely time in an actual emergency to study what needs to happen next. And if you say we don't have time to do it, how can you not have time? Because I guarantee you will not have time in the midst of a crisis. The knowledge of what you need to do, how to do it, when to say it, has to be embedded into the culture of your organization. You need a culture of preparedness in your school in order to protect the people in your purview, and it's only accomplished through regular training and exercising and testing of your program. You can do that through tabletop exercises. You can do that in a variety of ways. You can even do it virtually, and Firestorm is to facilitate that 5 times a year through our no-fee sessions, and then we can also help you structure personal or customized ones for your place in your organization. Because from the West Coast to the East, from the North to the South, we all have certainly varying and different natural disaster hazards and risks. Now, once you've done these steps, you must remember to communicate. And we know that organizations fail at communication consistently. Information gets siloed. Certain teams of people come up with great brainstorms, they document, they have these wonderful ideas, and then it stays within that little group of people. Or it goes into a binder on a shelf somewhere. And I don't know about you, but when I'm running down 100 flights of stairs to get out of a building that is in a structural threat, I don't have time to be looking through a binder. But today we can have plans and documents on our smartphones or other mobile devices, and that's an important thing to think about. We also must think about the ability for those devices and for other tools to be vulnerable. Now, you're very fortunate you work with a company that has superior security and superior products. But let's talk about something that was supposed to be quite secure, and that was, some of you are on the call from Dallas. As you know, your emergency warning system was hacked 2 weeks ago on the weekend. A hacker turned on all 156 emergency sirens in the downtown focused area of Dallas for 2.5 hours. Well, think about that in your schools today. If sirens suddenly went off, your students, your teachers, everyone is alerted to know to do certain things. But what if they kept going off over and over again? You have people who are confused. You have hospitals that may require some level of evacuation in response to a warning. And all of those things are going on for no need. And the first thing I thought of when I saw this was if they can be hacked on, they can be hacked off. And that's of a greater concern to me. So we need to assure that whatever systems we have in place for mass notification work. About, I'm not quite sure what the date was, but I live in Charleston, South Carolina. And we had, there was a bomb threat at the College of Charleston, which is downtown. And our downtown is not very big. And we've got an ocean on one side and we've got rivers on the other side. And so it's not a very large landmass. So when you evacuate hundreds of students or thousands of students from a small area into the businesses, they're not really evacuating. They're evacuating physical businesses, but they're all still downtown. Well, they had just put in a new notification system, and when they gave the notification to evacuate, some people got a message on their smartphones. Some people got no message. Some people got partial messages. Some people got the wrong message. So the person who was sort of in charge of messaging decided to issue another message to clarify the first message, and created so much confusion that half the people ignored it and half the people panicked. And it was an absolute fail. So we must test communications before we risk the people that are under our watch and responsibility, especially our children and students. Now, communications in a crisis falls into three categories. And Jim, if you could, can you talk about how you came up with the idea of coordination, crisis, and compliance?
By the way, the reason why Karen keeps saying if I could is I'm not limited in capabilities, but we're managing a couple of active crises while this webinar is going on, so it just adds a little element of excitement that we don't normally have when we're having these times together. In a crisis, there's three types of communications: coordination, the crisis and brand communications, and then the compliance. The first communications in a crisis is always around coordination. Do you want everyone to shelter in place? Do you want to do a lockout, a lockdown, or an evacuation? Because what you do in these first moments will make a significant determination of the amount of physical danger or injuries that we find that occurs. In a school environment, there are only four things that we can do: shelter in place. There's a weather-related event where it's unsafe outside of the school, so we're going to stay inside. Lockout, there's a physical violence threat outside of the school. We're going to keep it out, the lockout. Lockdown, there's a physical violence threat inside the school, and so we're going to lock down until the first responders and police get there. And then finally, there's evacuation. It's safer outside of the school than in. Maybe there's structural damage. There could be other things that are going on. So those communications should be clear, direct, and explicit. We also don't want to be too clever. I was in a school, and their school symbol were the Colts, and so when they were using evacuation, they were using Colts Stampede. Not the image that you want. It's unclear in what you need to have done. I was touring another school, and I heard over the PA system code orange. I turned to the person who was conducting the tour and asked, what does this mean? And the person said, I have no idea. So if your people have no idea, you're not going to get the behavior and the reaction that you're looking for associated with it. So the second day, we can think about communications around brand and reputation, but those aren't going to occur on that first day. We're just going to be dealing with this coordination element. By the way, there are compliance communications around a crisis, particularly a cyber breach. We'd have to notify people that their identity or other information has been compromised. Or if you become aware of a child that's at physical risk, then you are a mandated reporter and you have to make that report, and you're held to a higher standard. When we talk about brand and reputation, the three messages from Virginia Tech are shown at the bottom of this particular slide: that we will not be defined by the event, that we will invent the future, and we'll embrace the families. By the way, those messages are much more powerful than no comment. If you think about it, whatever bad thing has occurred, that's not going to be what defines your school. If you think about the invent the future, what are you going to do to ensure that this doesn't happen again? And then finally, you want to keep the focus on those that were directly impacted. So looking at what the roles and responsibilities are is absolutely critical. It's not a time to wing it. We do not recommend that the head of school become the spokesperson, and primarily because they're going to be directing and overseeing the response in the crisis. They don't have time to make those communications. Plus, remember, we told you almost everything you find out initially is wrong. You're making decisions on wrong and incomplete information, and once the head of your school loses credibility, it'll be very difficult to get those back. Planning the key messages: what would you say if you had an injury to a student or a death? Planning them out and doing the message map process, because it's easier to edit than it is to create. Having those messages laid out in front of you, and then finally having a way to communicate. whether it's phone calls, websites can become overloaded, but it's not the type of thing that you can do on the fly to say, well, I'll just open up a Facebook page and put all the information there. You want to have your Facebook page in advance, training your parents and students and teachers that that's where you go for information in a crisis, and having that up. The big advantage to you is that Facebook is hosting that site, so even if your equipment goes down, your servers and other devices, it's still going to be there to deliver those messages. Back to you, Karen.
Thank you, Jim. And folks, remember, you may have someone who is in charge of doing the social messaging for your organization. In a crisis, when there is no power, or there are no utilities, or people are stranded and cell phone batteries die, that person may not be able to issue the communication in the way that you had hoped. So we hope that you are 3 deep on the backup for that. While I don't think Jim knows our Twitter password off the top of his head, it is available to him and he knows where it is. So we have 2 other people also as backups to that. So we are 3 deep. We have 3 of us on this webinar today. We have backups of the PowerPoint that we're showing you available so that if something goes wrong, we're able to manage it. Can you always be 3 deep? We work on it, and it's a good goal to have. I'd also like to remind you that there will be chaos videos in abundance when a crisis occurs. And would you rather see an image of your school in complete chaos with children running all over, where you can objectively see they're at risk, they could fall, there are teachers that are yelling directions and no one's listening, and then we have safety officers trying to corral them, and parents can see and others can see into the window of the chaos of the organization? Or would you rather see strong leadership, clear messages, well-defined authority, and people who are obviously practiced and trained at what they're doing and confident? Leadership is confident. Because in just a second, I can have a Facebook Live video running, and the world can be watching inside the windows of your facility. It's important to remember that, and remember that we're there in order to keep people safe, and great leadership exemplifies that, and that's what we want people to see, because resiliency and preparedness are brand attributes. Now, what happens if we do all this practicing and we do all this planning, but nobody can get anywhere? So we have a situation that occurs, and you have 2 situations. People are either isolated outside of your facility and can't get to it, or people are isolated inside your facility. So we have 2 different needs. If we have people who need to bed down in our facilities, or if indeed we are an evacuation spot. If you're an evacuation spot, you have materials, you have equipment, you have foods, cots, etc. What if you don't? But you still have students who are stranded. Not only that, but you have panicked parents trying to get to them, and then once they do get to them, they can't leave. So you have that scenario to think through. And then what if no one can get to your facility or your place for a longer period of time, but you have to continue to conduct the business of education? The image you're looking at is after Hurricane Matthew here, where I live in South Carolina. I am from New York originally and then lived in Ohio for many, many years. I can drive in the snow. I can drive pretty good on ice. I've done a 360 on an expressway before and just kept moving forward. So I think I can do that okay. I cannot drive through a flood, and neither can you. And I wasn't familiar with how to handle some of the events that occur once I moved to the South. Fortunately, I worked for Jim Satterfield, and he told me what I needed to do. So if we weren't able to operate in our normal way, what contingency plans can we at least try to set up now so that we're prepared to do that? And will our personnel be able to carry out those plans if they don't have power? How can we make sure that they might be able to do that? Is there an alternate location that we can get them to? Would your school be able to continue its core operations remotely from home base? Or perhaps there are some types of temporary office space available where you could actually have mini schoolrooms of some type and conference rooms. What other special requirements will you have? How about for those children with special needs? Are you still able to educate them in the same way? How long do we anticipate the impact to occur? How long has, for everyone on this call, I want you to think about the longest time you've ever been without power. And when I ask that question to most people, and myself included, it's usually about a week. And a week is a long time without power. A week without power and clean water is an eternity. When Hurricane Hugo hit this area that I live in, two things that are stark reminders of Hurricane Hugo. The first is everybody evacuated to a school that's just up the coast, just about 15, 19 miles from where I'm located. And they evacuated into that school, and they sheltered in the gym of the school, and then the tide surge came in and flooded the school. It was a really tragic event, and it will never happen again in that way here. The second thing that I know to have happened is the house across the street from me was leveled. It was devastated because there was a significant rain event prior to the actual hurricane. And so we have huge living oaks all around this neighborhood. And so the ground became saturated, and when the winds came, the roots were softened. We're only about 7 feet above sea level. And so the trees came down and just destroyed the houses. And no one could get out because the trees were blocking the roads. And these aren't little trees. They're huge, huge trees. I have some photographs you'll see in a moment. So it took a long time for help to come to saw those trees up and get them away. And my neighbors to the north of me told me that it was about 3.5 weeks without power and no ability to get anywhere, no ability to get to stores. And so now in his garage, Lord love him, he's got an ice machine in there. He's got all kinds of stuff over there. So work with your neighboring schools and associations and organizations so that you can make sure you can share resources and help each other. In this picture that you're seeing, this is around the corner from my house. This is one of my neighbors. And the first time Jim Satterfield saw this picture, he said, that employee is not going to work. That employee can barely get out of their house. Their cars were totaled. This was a mess, and it took a long time to clean up, really great people. And so it's important that your employees and the parents, the students in your organization also understand how they are their own first responder. In the case of a natural disaster, whatever it may be, it's going to be a while before help can get to you in a triage situation. And so it's important that you help your employees and others know how to be their own first responders. Firestorm has a book called Disaster Ready People for Disaster Ready America. It's on our website. You can find it under the Resources tab, or just send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com. We have an ebook, or you can get it in hard copy for your entire organization. We can talk to you about how to do that. But it covers all of these different steps of natural disasters, civil unrest, etc., so that we can help people to be safe and prepared. And, you know, if you lose power, a loss of power sets you back 150 years. How many times have you walked in a room, and I don't care how many times the power has been out for the whole week, we just kept flipping switches on walls. I know Jim said he's had similar experiences. You forget that you're just not able to just flip a switch and have power, or that your refrigerator is going to work. And I can tell you that the most attractive I have ever found my husband is when he walked in the house with that Champion 4000 generator. You can also use little tools. You can find them inexpensively on the web, hand generators to at least power up a cell phone if you're in an isolated area and you need to get a call out or some communication out. think through what you need to do, have your bug out bag ready, but also have the tools available to your team so that they know what to do in case of an emergency or a crisis. Just some observations that I had during the time of Matthew. Matthew was not a huge hurricane event, but it caused significant damage because we had a 1,000-year flood. We had a tropical system sitting off the coast, and we had a king tide. And that king tide flooded our downtown here in Charleston, and that continued up the coast into North Carolina and Virginia. And then the wind event occurred, and there were trees that were softened, and so they came down, as you saw in that previous picture. And the flooding event occurred, and it was much more severe north of Charleston, South Carolina, and it was quite severe here. I have friends who just last week moved into their home after settling all of the property and insurance and other issues. Their home that was devastated during the event. And then once the wind situation had passed and the hurricane had moved up the coast a bit, we had all this water sitting, and it started to recede back to the ocean, and it overwhelmed the rivers that we have on both sides of the city and in some areas, and overflowed the banks. And then the roads began to wash out, and we lost bridges and roads, and there was no way to get to people. People became isolated, and there were schools that were completely unable to reopen or delayed almost 6 months. So the impacts were felt far and wide. So we'd like you to consider how you can help everyone in your organization become more prepared. And last, what we want to do is talk about what your insurance will cover and how will it help. Jim, what are your closing thoughts on insurance in this type of situation?
The time to find out that you have a problem is not in the middle of a crisis. Are we covered? Are we not covered? Go to your broker that handles your insurance. Ask them to tell you what's covered in a particular test or a scenario that you design. Share with them your vulnerability risk analysis, your all hazards approach. Ask them to document what the coverage is. That's extremely important for you to know and to be able to follow through in each of those areas. So as we look at those are things to figure out ahead of time. You've got to have a crisis management program. You need this open source intelligence. You're going to find out what's going on social media quicker in many cases than you will from any other source. Document and test your plans, and then finally focus on what your response would be. Decisions, actions, and communications. This chart that's up right now is a maturity model for crisis management. You'll notice that we focus on decision processes, roles, responsibilities, information clarity, speed of decision making, and communications effectiveness. And we measure it across 4 different dimensions. Stage 1, it's an onset, it's a liability. You don't have your plans together, and it's kind of just make it up as you go along. Stage 2, companies and schools are at a point where they've got a reaction. There's some of the elements that are there, they're in place. A stage 3, it's supportive. It's part of the pre-action events that are well-defined and tested and trained. But the goal is to get to the culture element, where it's a part of who you are as an organization. That's where you want to be. Every time you move between one of those stages, it's a breakthrough opportunity. Getting to that 4th stage gives you a real value breakthrough. If you do a test or an exercise, or you actually have a crisis event, do a hot wash afterwards. Analyze how did we do. Look at this chart with the goal of improving over time. Now, Karen, we're going to have a white paper out or a brief associated with this, and I think you've got up on the screen where people can go to get that in the next 48 hours. So that's good in coming together. I also want to thank again RenWeb for the underwriting of these webinar series and what we're doing and sharing. And you can go to firestorm.com to get more information. You can link there to view past webinars and register for future ones. So there's a lot of things happening around all of us every single day. Something is going to define your organization. how you respond in a crisis is likely to be that element that defines who you are and what happens to your people. Dr. Charles Steger at Virginia Tech, the president, had to pick up the phone 32 times and call a family and tell them that their loved one was not coming home. Our prayer for you today is that that doesn't happen to anyone on the call. But having a plan, having it trained and tested, being ready for natural disasters will make a difference in outcomes. So thanks from Firestorm for being here today. Thanks, Karen, for emceeing and pulling all this together. Thanks, Bill, for making sure that we kept on schedule and on time. So Karen, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you for your insights. I hope everyone enjoyed our session today. You can watch a replay of this or share it with your peers on our YouTube channel. We'll be sending a link out from GoToWebinar with that information in just a couple of hours from GoToWebinar. And until next month, we say thank you and keep safe. Have a wonderful summer break, and we'll talk to you on the other side. This will end our session for today. Thank you, and have a great day.